What is Bloodborne? Ah, that sounds really pretentious, but that's literally the first line I've written in my outline for this video. I'm really bad at coming up with introductions to videos, so bad that I can't even figure out how to answer that question and actually start talking about Bloodborne. Do I describe what type of game Bloodborne is? Talk about how it's an amazing game that's become one of my favourites of all time? Should I start this video like those science experiments they made us write in middle school and outline my hypothesis and what I'm hoping to prove by making this? Oh, this is bad. I should start over. Bloodborne is an action RPG made by From Software, part of a loosely connected series of games that started with Demon's Souls on PlayStation 3 and continued through Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2. The main legacy of this series of games seems to be that they're the most difficult video games known to mankind. At least that's the impression you get from their marketing or from reading reviews about them. Or by the fact that Dark Souls has literally become shorthand for difficult on some gaming websites and YouTube channels. But I'm going to disprove all of that, while also talking about how Bloodborne is one of the best games ever made, and the perfect jumping in point for anyone who's been fooled into thinking the Soulsborne games are too difficult for them. As a quick aside before we get started, because I can't think of anywhere else to put this paragraph, I didn't actually intend to make a video about Bloodborne when I started playing the game. I honestly hadn't anticipated having such a strong reaction to the game as I did. I only decided to make this video about halfway through the game after a single tweet encouraged me to do so. What this means is I don't have much footage of the earlier portion of the game. I do have New Game Plus footage from the beginning area, which I'm going to use when talking about the early parts of the game, which is why you might notice I have weapons and clothes that I shouldn't otherwise have had access to. I'll also be borrowing a little footage from my friend Luna, who's amazing and one of my favourite streamers. Seriously, go follow her, twitch.tv/LunaMothwings. Also, some of the footage is from streams I did earlier last year, so you might see some footage with my dumb face in the corner of the screen. I just want to make that clear before we get going, and I promise to actually plan things in advance for videos in the future. La, la, la. It's probably important to start with some context to this video. My journey before even starting Bloodborne is actually quite an important part of why I hold the game in such high regard that it might be my favourite game of the PS4 generation and is probably one of my favourite games of all time. I'd love to say that it was as simple as picking up a copy of Demon's Souls back on the PS3, but I've never actually played Demon's Souls. Not even the PS5 remake that everyone's been raving about. Wait, I've started streaming Demon's Souls, not self-remove this sentence. Sadly, I only owned a PlayStation 3 for a couple of months for reasons that aren't worth getting into here, and the only PS3 exclusive game I actually got around to checking out was Heavy Rain. Because I hate myself. My first foray into a Souls-like game was actually with Lords of the Fallen. Ugh, I really used the because I hate myself joker sentence too early. I have a theory about why I skipped Dark Souls 1 and 2 and instead went straight for the game that was heavily inspired by From Software's Souls series, but we'll get into that. Lords of the Fallen is a bad game, for a myriad of reasons that I don't want to labour on in a video that's meant to be primarily about one of my favourite games ever. It's clunky, slow, unintuitive, uninspired, and generally uninviting. I dropped Lords of the Fallen fairly quickly and kind of wrote off the super hardcore and challenging action RPG subgenre that people were calling Souls-likes as something that just wasn't for me. Because, and I cannot stress this point enough, I used to be an idiot, or at least an even bigger idiot than I am now, which a lot of the next paragraph will attest. When Bloodborne came out in 2015, I played it out of an obligation to have an opinion on one of PlayStation's biggest exclusive games at the time. I played it a bit, didn't jive with the extremely challenging gameplay, and blaming the game's difficulty, wandered off to go and play Axiom Verge, which I loved, despite that game also being an incredibly challenging game, and somehow the critical thinking portion of my brain didn't engage and question why I bounced straight out of Bloodborne but fell into Axiom Verge. I just accepted it without question. I blundered around playing games for another couple of years when in 2017 an upcoming game caught my attention. An action RPG where you fight demons in feudal Japan, playing as a fictional character based on one of the few people from the Western world to ever become a samurai. Everything about this game seemed like it was exactly my kind of thing, except for the part where it was clearly inspired by From Software's latter day output. But the gameplay looked faster paced and more aggressive than what I knew of Dark Souls and its inspirations. Too intrigued by the setting, I took the plunge and ran headfirst into the same wall of challenge that I hit while playing Bloodborne years earlier while confronting the game's second boss, Onryoki. But rather than walk away from the game, I stuck at it. I'd been enjoying the game a lot leading up to Onryoki, exploring the village leading to the encounter, learning how to fight the game's standard enemies, and finding all of the Kodama I could because, oh my god, how cute are they! Eventually, I beat Onryoki after many attempts. I spent a couple of hours battling, learning its attack patterns, as well as the capabilities of the player character. Even the fight I won was incredibly messy. It was a miracle I actually made it through. But I did, and progressed to the next level, ready to get my ass handed to me over and over again. But something had changed. I learned how to play the game. The third level of Neo features a lot of Oni, larger demonic enemies that are far tougher than the mostly human inhabitants of the level before it. The game's third boss, Hino Enma, was also considered to be a really tough early game fight. However, instead of making slow but steady progress, I found that I was actually doing pretty well. I even killed Hino Enma in 2 attempts, which was nice. I played a lot of Neo, even going so far as to put it third in my 2017 Game of the Year list. But even more than simply finding it an incredibly enjoyable game to experience, Neo fundamentally shifted the way I approached and interacted with similar games. It taught me to be patient, to approach a game on its own terms, and not just try to play everything in my own playstyle or not at all, and that it's okay to die sometimes in games that are supposed to be challenging. Thanks to taking the time to truly appreciate Neo for what it was, instead of what I wanted it to be, I was able to play and enjoy other Souls-adjacent games. It was while playing and reviewing the sequel, Neo 2, earlier in 2020, and staring down the prospect of a never-ending lockdown, that I made preparations to finally give Bloodborne a proper chance. I assumed I'd stream the game once as entertainment for my viewers, because it turns out playing hard games badly on Twitch can really draw a crowd. Either that or my friends and regulars just enjoy seeing me fail at things in a comical manner. Instead, everyone who came to watch that initial stream, and the streams that followed, got to see me completely fall in love with the game in real time. Okay, so that's the context section of the video done with. I promise I'm going to talk mostly about nothing but Bloodborne and FromSoft games from here on out. So for anyone who's still here and hasn't been driven away by clicking on a video that's meant to be about Bloodborne and has accidentally been about how good Neo is, your patience has been rewarded. And I'm deeply sorry.
Perhaps you've seen it. Maybe in a dream. A murky, forgotten land.
I'm going to say something that's going to come across, well, like I'm being a bit of a dick. But hear me out, and we can all get through this without shouting at each other. Bloodborne isn't all that hard of a game. It's a challenging game for sure, and I know those are synonyms, but I think there's a pretty critical difference between a game that's hard and a game that challenges. And I had to assign them 2 different words, and those are the words I've decided to go with. For me, a game that's hard is something that's designed to frustrate, to beat a player over and over and not feel particularly fun or entertaining. Bloodborne falls squarely into the challenging camp, a game that can certainly be difficult, but one that the player feels consistently capable of overcoming. I'll expand more on that in a bit, because for now I want to focus on why Bloodborne and all post-Demon Souls From Software games are considered Herculean challenges that few gamers can even begin to conquer. There are 2 main reasons for this. The first and arguably biggest is the way discussions of these games generally shake out. Let's take a look at a trailer for the PC version of the original Dark Souls, which was shown at Gamescom in 2012.
this upon self.
Do you see the problem? They called the PC version of the game the Prepare to Die edition, and showcased that edition of the game with a trailer made up almost entirely of the player character being beaten to death, mauled, stabbed, shocked, and eaten by gigantic monstrosities. The marketing for Dark Souls leaned heavily into the idea that this game is really, really hard, and you're going to die a lot. And you know, that's probably fairly accurate. I've only played just enough of Dark Souls to have some footage to play over this particular section of the video. And when I played Bloodborne, I died plenty of times. But you know what Prepare to Die as a marketing slogan makes me remember? All of those infuriating bosses, or unfair and sudden difficulty spikes, or games in general that felt like they were designed to be frustrating and nothing else. Like the World of Darkness in Final Fantasy III. No one's going to remember that. What are you doing, Amy? Come on. Like the courtroom battle in Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. An area where you start unarmed, surrounded by a high number of pretty tough enemies with very few checkpoints. You're going to die a lot in that level. It's going to get super frustrating, and if you're like me, you're not really going to play the game anymore. And here's a trailer and a marketing slogan for Dark Souls that basically says, here's an entire game full of Wolfenstein 2's courtroom level. Have fun dying, fucknuts. It's not just the game's marketing that makes Dark Souls sound like a game so brutally difficult that it kills you in real life every time you die. Just for fun, let's scroll through the game's PS3 Metacritic page. Alright, cool. I already have the Dark Souls PS3 Metacritic open. So let's have a look and see how many of the summarizing paragraphs talk about the game via its difficulty. To survive, one must have patience, persistence, and a high level of concentration. Nothing is spoon-fed or handed to you on a silver platter. You gotta be a true gamer to play Dark Souls. Dark Souls is superb, but it's not a game for everyone. Describes every video game ever. Play UK says this is a beautifully built roleplay from which there is no escape. That's terrifying, actually. You must experience it for yourself and then suddenly die, of course. Of course, yes, you must die. It's predestined. Official PlayStation magazine, this is at times a devastating experience. There's no denying that a substantial part of the appeal is masochistic. Jesus Christ. Wow. Dark Souls is a twisted, depraved, unforgiving bundle of death, hopelessness, and despair. Jesus, it's no wonder people didn't want to play this game. Like, that's a 9 out of 10 review, and they're calling it an twisted, depraved, unforgiving bundle of death, hopelessness, and despair. Fucking Christ. A gem of sublime darkness. In the same way that an infamous ring did poison the soul of the one wearing it, this game becomes both the burden and the treasure of the one playing it. Cruel, even more so than its predecessor, from which it keeps almost everything. Jesus Christ. Dark Souls is not the One Ring of video games. The One Ring was bad, guys. I don't know if I need to point this out to you, but the One Ring was bad. If entertainment is fun without failure and progress without pain, you'll have to find it somewhere else. Fucking Christ. Dark Souls beckons the masochistic with its chilly indifference. Oh my god. People are talking about a video game. It's no wonder I can't get people to play these fucking games. If you play games for fun, this isn't for you. What the fuck? Jesus. Because of its insanely high difficulty, Dark Souls isn't for everyone. I feel like I'm losing my mind reading these. I should have read these before I started recording. Oh man, I was only supposed to do this for like a couple of minutes, but I'm gonna have to edit this. Because some of the best ones are, oh my god, hard like a frowning diamond. Oh god. Dark Souls will easily dominate your gaming skill, making you submissive to its will. It's a ritual of frustration. Yeah, what is worth the journey? If you were okay with a little pain. I mean, I don't want to kink shame, but I'm pretty sure the act of playing Dark Souls is nothing like this. Jesus. If you push yourself through the nightmare, they're calling it a nightmare, and it's a good thing. This game's a nightmare. You should play it. 10 out of 10. Or I guess 8 out of 10. Dark Souls isn't a game you play for fun. It's something you do to say you've done, like running a marathon or climbing Everest. You won't enjoy it like you will other games. Like, you're trying to recommend this game, right? You gave it an 8 out of 10. I can only assume you gave it a positive review. Guys, this is why people don't want to play these games. Because all you talk about is how the game is so difficult and not fun. Like climbing Everest. Like, I'm laughing because this is just, when you read it all like this, it's just absurd. This is only for the hardcore gamers. Don't play this game if you want to have fun. Oh my god. Like, okay, I know that these are just summarizing paragraphs, and all of these reviews have, like, you know, lots more text to them that probably own more context about the game, but, like, if someone's just like, oh, I've heard of this game called Dark Souls, I'll check out the Metacritic, and they're going to be like, ooh, 89. That's really high. Let me just see what some of the reviews actually say. They're not going to click on every single one of these reviews, they're just going to look at the summaries. And like, these summaries are some really off-putting. Unless you hate yourself and don't want to have fun playing a video game. Like, that's what these summaries basically say. And a bit about bugs, I guess. Like, don't know. It's good, really. It's good. It's just also, you know, like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings. It's exactly the same as the One Ring, guys, but it's good. Trust me. Like, wow. Okay, sure. No thanks. The greatest difficulty of Dark Souls is apparently trying to find a review that doesn't make playing the game sound like a Sisyphean task in its summarizing paragraph. Fans of the game aren't necessarily much more helpful. There's a reason Get Good became the meme that it did, and it originated from fans of Dark Souls telling new players how to get better at the game, which is akin to pushing someone off a boat into the ocean, and when they ask you how to swim, you just tell them to stop drowning. Which is itself separate from the arguments that are upped every time someone suggests that Soulsborne games should have an easy mode. Tangent, it should, by the way, and it wouldn't ruin the game in the slightest because it would allow more people to get into the game and wouldn't affect my enjoyment of it in the slightest because I wouldn't use it. And even if I did use it the first time I played it, that would still have allowed me to enjoy the game far earlier than I actually did. And if you have a problem with that, you can fight me. There are great guides that exist on wikis, YouTube, Reddit, and more, which I made great use of during my Bloodborne playthrough, shout out to everyone who pointed me in the direction of Ludwig's Holy Blade, but by and large the idea that Soulsborne games are monumentally difficult is perpetuated by the discussion surrounding the games just as much as the game's initial marketing. All of this equals a game series that becomes legendary due to its difficulty. Anyone who's heard of Soulsborne games that hasn't played them will probably know them as extremely hard games. And look, there are definitely some players for whom that will be a major draw, but despite what a lot of my friends think about how masochistic I am, and I'm looking mostly at you, Keith, I'm not massively interested in a maddeningly difficult experience that exists purely to kick the ever-loving shit out of me over and over. If I wanted to have that experience, I could just try to watch an episode of The Big Bang Theory, a game that tells me to prepare to die in its own title, and that reviews trip over themselves describing as the hardest games ever, is not a game that I want to play. And I didn't. When all I knew about From Software games were that they were really, really hard, I played just enough of Dark Souls to confirm my suspicions that it wasn't an experience for me, and moved on with my life. But that's not really the type of game Dark Souls, or any of the Soulsborne games, are. I said at the beginning of this chapter that Soulsborne games aren't as hard as they're made out to be, and that there were two reasons this myth had been perpetuated. And the second reason is going to get its own chapter.
Welcome home, good hunter. What is it you desire?
Bloodborne, like all of the Souls games and many other challenging games before it, demands to be played in a very specific way. This was a lesson I learned from playing Neo that I brought with me to Bloodborne. You can't brute force your way through the game. Its combat mechanics and general gameplay all mesh together to create something very specific, something that you need to meet halfway if you want to make progress. Like any video game, really. Learning the particular rhythms of Bloodborne is what people mean when they talk about getting good at the game. Most players who start Bloodborne for the first time will have very similar experiences. They'll die moments after the opening cutscene when they encounter the werewolf in Iosefka's clinic and try to fight it unarmed instead of running away from the giant beast. Then they'll wake up in the hunter's dream, arm themselves with a melee weapon and a gun, and return to Yharnam, where they'll proceed to get thoroughly wrecked by one of the many enemies they'll find wandering the first street. Probably this guy. Or this guy. Or if they make it past them, the two werewolves at the top of these stairs. Although to be fair, I think I've died at least once to every enemy on the way to Cleric Beast. Bloodborne does a great job of stacking the odds against you in its opening few streets. When you manage to make it past all of these enemies, your reward is to get annihilated by the first boss you encounter, who drops down out of nowhere and can end your pitiful existence in a few seconds. It's at this point that many players will probably decide that enough is enough and walk away. It's confirmation bias. You go into Bloodborne thinking the game will be incredibly difficult, die a bunch in the opening area, and figure if this is what playing the entire game is going to be like, no thanks, I'll just do something else with my time. That's not speculation on my part. I can just check the trophy list on my PlayStation and see that less than half the people who play Bloodborne have beaten Cleric Beast of Father Gascoigne, because, spoiler alert, you can actually skip Cleric Beast altogether. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've walked away from plenty of games fairly rapidly because I wasn't feeling them, or knew fairly quickly that they weren't for me, or they're just not great games. Sunk cost fallacy has kept me playing a lot of games far longer than I should have, and there are so many good games knocking around that wasting your time on one you don't like is something you definitely shouldn't do. It's what I did. Until like mid last year, when I decided to play and stick with the game, I was one of those people who had been brutally murdered a dozen times in the streets and back alleys and bridges and on the ladders of central Yharnam, and just moved on. It was only in sticking with the game through a fairly painful first 90 minutes or so that it really clicked. When I streamed the game last summer, I was talking to a couple of my viewers who loved Bloodborne after I'd finally beaten Father Gascoigne. As I mashed through the enemies in the next area with an unprecedented amount of ease, I talked enthusiastically about wanting to continue a game I'd only planned to stream once, for a few hours, as a kind of joke. Funny. It's just a way to do an entertaining stream and let everyone see me die a bunch and get really mad at the game. Instead, I talked about finally feeling like the game had clicked. I understood it. I could play it. I could play it well. Reasonably well. Because of the marketing and reviews of Bloodborne and previous From Software games, I'd gone into this game intimidated. I honestly didn't think I would make it past the first boss. The game was too hard. I wasn't all that good at third-person action RPGs, the boss fights were notoriously difficult, and I had trouble fighting regular enemies. This time was completely different. I beat 2 bosses in my first stream, and by the time I reached Vicar Amelia, the 4th boss I fought, I killed her on my first attempt. In fact, now that I think about it, I killed every subsequent boss in either 1 or 2 attempts. Aside from the second and last boss, whose very name would be a spoiler. Okay, so I'm going to go in depth on some of Bloodborne's systems and mechanics, the flow of combat, the way it tutorializes and teaches you all of these things, and I can't really do that without spoiling some stuff. Rather than spoil the entire game, I'm going to focus on the beginning area of the game, Central Yharnam, and the first mandatory boss, Father Gascoigne. Which means, how do I put this delicately? Spoiling the absolute shit out of the first couple of hours of the game. And probably a little bit about Cainhurst Castle, because it's such a cool area. I know I'm going to end up gushing about it at some point, and probably some other sections of the game. Basically, if you want to avoid spoilers, you should just duck out before the next chapter. If I've already convinced you to give Bloodborne a shot, that's great. I genuinely hope you have a good time with it. But the rest of this video probably isn't something you're going to want to watch. The game is pretty cheap on the PlayStation Store. It's one of the PlayStation Hits games. And if you have a PlayStation 5, it's part of the PS Plus collection. I'd love to hear how you get on, so come back and drop a comment, or hit me up on Twitter. My username's in the video's description. One piece of advice before you leave, something that really helped me. If you run past the two werewolves on the bridge, this bridge, and go down these stairs through this house, you can find a shortcut to the central Yharnam lamp that can help you avoid the main street. Seriously, opening this one shortcut was one of the reasons I stuck with the game for long enough to fall in love with it. Okay, right, now that's out of the way, everyone left should have already played the game, or needs some more convincing, or doesn't care about spoilers. So, let's talk about...
You're sure to be in a fine haze about now, but don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good. You know, it's just what hunters do. You'll get used to it.
The first couple hours of Bloodborne have you exploring central Yharnam, the place you wake up in at the beginning of the game. There are streets filled with monsters and men who have seemingly gone mad, a big bridge with even more monsters on it, an unreasonable amount of massive ladders, another bridge with a lovely surprise at one end, people who have locked themselves in their homes to avoid the hunt, sewers filled with, you guessed it, monsters, and at the end of it all, another hunter. Well, that's nice. Or would be if, he hadn't succumbed to the blood and wasn't trying to kill everyone and everything in Yharnam, including you. This is all a lot of people will see of Bloodborne, again judging by PlayStation trophy stats and conversations I've had with people who have briefly played the game before calling it quits. And me, as I mentioned earlier, I was one of those people. The first time I played Bloodborne, this street was as far as I got. I really liked the mechanics, but I just kept getting killed over and over trying to get past this fucking street. And so what changed? Well, partly it was lessons I'd learned from other video games, which I've already discussed, and partly it was because I'd chosen to ignore the one thing Soulsborne games were famous for, thanks to marketing and reviews and the general discourse surrounding them. Dark Souls is a twisted, depraved, unforgiving bundle of death, hopelessness, and despair. But mostly, it was because I sat down with a controller in my hand and hit New Game with an open mind. I was receptive to what Bloodborne was trying to teach me. Also, I decided to stream the game. Look, I'm not saying you have to be a streamer or a content creator to actually enjoy Bloodborne, but by deciding to stream it, I was committed to giving the game a significant portion of my time. Where I might have just tried to get through this street a couple of times, get killed and leave, I was in this for a few hours at least. I really didn't give myself a choice but to figure this game out or go mad trying. And it didn't take too long, and to be honest, it didn't really take too much. Central Yharnam is essentially Bloodborne's tutorial area. It doesn't advertise itself as such, aside from finding the basic controls on the ground of Iosefka's clinic and the Hunter's Dream. There are no classic tutorial moments to be found. Instead, there's just a lot of enemies, each with their own different lesson to impart upon you. The enemies in this street teach you how to handle fighting multiple baddies at once, and teach you how to fight groups with a variety of weapons and attack patterns. There's guy with shield, guy with pitchfork, guy with torch, guy with gun, and dog. These larger enemies, the ones with the brick or the giant axe, are fairly easy to parry when you know... Wait, hang on, let me find the right footage. These bigger enemies are fairly easy to parry when you know their specific timing. The wind-up for most of their attacks is long and gives you plenty of time to shoot them and follow up with a visceral attack. These crows are well hidden and attack out of nowhere to teach you to expect enemies to be anywhere. Also, to scare the shit out of you. Seriously, the noise they make when they attack is fucking terrifying. You can roll through these coffins to find a hidden path that takes you to a whole other section of the level, one which contains an NPC and a lot of really useful items, including a set of the game's best armor, teaching you that exploration is incredibly useful. These werewolves teach you that dodging backwards will sometimes be the thing that gets you killed, and maybe dodging sideways is a better idea. This bridge exists to teach you that traps are a thing. Cleric Beast, the optional boss that most people will find first, is here to teach you that the best place to be in a fight is generally behind your enemy, and it's usually a really good idea to stick close and be aggressive. Also, that the soundtrack is one of the best in video games. It's not obvious, but the game is very subtly teaching you everything you need to take with you through the rest of the game. You won't get weaker early enemies to test your parrying ability or the fighting mechanics on. You won't be bombarded with tooltips as you fight your way through the hunt. Instead, Bloodborne tutorializes you in real time. Fighting the brick-wielding brutes, for example, is an excellent place to hone your parry timing, but these enemies aren't made less difficult because they exist to teach you something. Instead, you learn by fighting your way through deadly opponents who will kill you if you screw something up. Honestly, it's a better way to learn. I've lost count of the many times I've played other games with heavy-handed tutorials, dropping me into special areas of the game designed to be almost completely risk-free, teaching me a sometimes overwhelming amount of mechanics. Usually by the time I'm out of these tutorial areas and into the main game, I've already forgotten half of what the game's taught me. And even the lessons I can remember haven't really stuck with me, because I was taught them in a non-practical environment. Maybe this is just me, but I learn best by doing something. Like making videos. I spent ages watching tutorials for Premiere Pro, the software I use to edit these videos. But it's only really when I started actually editing videos that useful information started to become ingrained in my memory. A game that throws me into a special section to teach me its mechanics, free from the context of the rest of experience or how I'm going to use them, actually teaches me less than a game like Bloodborne, one which told me the basic controls and then set me loose in the first proper area, letting me figure all of this shit out for myself. The first time I parried a brute and figured out how the timing of parrying actually worked, I was able to take that information with me and parry other enemies, or even better, spot when parrying wouldn't be the best or even a viable option. I mean, sure, I died a bunch fighting these enemies and ran past them whenever I could, especially in the early game, but once that lesson sunk in and I could parry their attacks consistently, or spot which of their attacks were best to parry and which were best to dodge, that's information I learned myself, the hard way, and it's a skill I was able to apply to every other enemy in the game. And that's a magical feeling. It's the feeling that I've earned this knowledge against the toughest enemies that patrol the streets of Yharnam. Bloodborne becomes a little less difficult every time you figure something like this out. There's a wonderful sense of progression to it all. You become more powerful, not just by gaining blood echoes and leveling up your stats or upgrading your weapon, but because you're learning a little more about the game with every enemy you fight, win or lose, die or survive. It all eventually leads to Father Gascoigne.
Ah, tonight there's something different in the air. Men leave as hunters and return as beasts. Let there be no doubt. If it moves, you can be sure it's a beast. And even if it doesn't, well, don't take any chances.
Father Gascoigne is the end point of Central Yharnam, standing between you and progressing to the next area, Cathedral Ward. While it's entirely feasible you could completely miss Cleric Beast or decide to explore the sewers rather than attempt to defeat it, there's no way to circumvent this boss. You have to fight him, and you have to kill him. This fight tests everything the game has subtly taught you as you traverse Central Yharnam. I've heard Gascoigne described as a skill check. To get past him, you have to actually have gotten good at Bloodborne. And that is true, more or less. He's a culmination of every lesson you've learned in getting to him. Except the thing with the flaming boulder, he won't suddenly go all Wile E. Coyote on you and start dropping Acme anvils on you or something. The fight against Papa G was the boss fight I had to repeat the most. I imagine it's the boss fight most people who see Bloodborne through have to repeat the most. The first couple of attempts I took at him, he absolutely fucking annihilated me. And that was with me playing the game more than 5 years after it's released, armed with the knowledge that Daddy Gascoigne was the boss that trips a lot of people up. Honestly, I completely understand people who take a couple of runs at this fight and just give up there and then. Paul Gascoigne is a hunter, just like you. Just a bit more mad? He's been overcome by the blood and forgotten himself, killing everything and everyone in his path. From a gameplay mechanic standpoint, that means he moves and attacks in a very similar manner as the player, albeit with a ton of extra health, though mercifully he can't heal. He's armed with a hunter's axe and a hunter's pistol, which are both weapons you yourself might actually be armed with. He dodges, he shoots, he can even parry your attacks and visceral you if you're not careful. About 3/4 of the way through the fight, he transforms into a werewolf thing and goes absolutely berserk, jumping around the graveyard you're fighting in and really messing up your lovely hunter's outfit with massive claw marks and the blood gushing from your gaping wound. To get past him, You have to learn his moves, when to dodge, when there's an opening to attack, when to go for a parry. You can't really dodge backwards to create space. You'll either get shot or obliterated by whatever attack you're attempting to avoid. Being aggressive and sticking close to Daddy Warbucks helps a lot. Getting behind him for a backstab or parrying him is essential to your eventual victory. He has quite a wide variety of attacks, as do you, so being mindful that an attack can come from anywhere is critical. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because these are the lessons I listed in the previous chapter, the ones that Central Yharnam subtly teaches you without you realising it. Harder Daddy is probably my favourite boss fight in Bloodborne, and probably one of my favourite boss fights in all of video games. Everything comes together in this fight to make you feel like you're truly overcoming an incredible challenge. Gaza comes at you with everything he's got, and you have to give him everything you've got in return. At a certain point during my attempts to beat him, I stopped needing to look at my stamina bar. The game had gotten so into me that I instinctively knew exactly how much stamina my dodging and attacking was using. I could sense exactly when to pull back, when to go on the offensive, and when I could dodge. You engage in a vicious duel of the death, trading blows backwards and forwards, the amazing soundtrack elevating the battle to truly epic status. It's an incredible challenge, but one that never feels insurmountable if you can just pull off that parry or dodge just a second earlier. The first time I beat Father Gascoigne felt genuinely amazing, and you can tell that's true because I've stopped calling him stupid names. Everything about Bloodborne clicked for me in that moment. As I lit the lantern that spawned in the middle of the graveyard and found this red brooch on the body of a woman, weird, I wonder what that's for, I felt like I had defeated a genuinely epic foe and overcome a genuine challenge. Bloodborne had nothing left to teach me. I mean, there were still plenty of bosses, enemies, locations, and more that I'd have to learn and pit myself against, but in making my way successfully through Central Yharnam and defeating its erstwhile gatekeeper, I had proven to the game and to myself that I was armed with all the knowledge I needed to see the night through. Bloodborne had, the hard way, taught me its rhythms and nuances. It had handed me the keys to success, and I was hungry for more. It took me 8 attempts to beat the Old Father, but when I finally laid him to rest, I knew I could beat whatever else the game would throw at me. The second time I fought him during my second run through the game on New Game Plus, I completely rinsed him. It wasn't even a particularly close fight. I mean, I still had to focus and concentrate to make sure I didn't get, horribly murdered, as you do through the entire game. But I thought it was quite telling that the boss that gave me the most trouble in my original run was so easily swept aside by the skills the game had taught me the second time around. Oh wait, I didn't even talk about how the game teaching me about the importance of exploration helped me beat all my...
You're a beast hunter, aren't you? I knew it. That's precisely how I started out. So, what say you? Our prey might differ, but we are hunters, the both of us. Why not cooperate and discuss the things we've learned?
I feel like there's a fairly common misconception that Bloodborne, or any of the Souls games, exist purely to want you dead. If you play games for fun,
this isn't for you.
Bloodborne is not a game that inherently wants to kill you. That's just stupid marketing and overblown focus on the challenge that Soulsborne games offer. You can see this in action if you play a Souls game that thinks difficulty is what makes Souls games good. They focus so much on being hard that they forget to make, good game as well. These games are designed to be a challenge for sure, but the games aren't actively rooting against you any more than your D&D Dungeon Master is, no matter how much it sometimes feel like you want to kill me, Keith. Bloodborne is a game that wants you to succeed, if we can ascribe it a motivation at all. It's probably better to say that Hidetaka Miyazaki and the team that created the game want you to succeed, but saying Bloodborne is less of a mouthful. From Software designed a game where you have to earn your victory against difficult odds, but there's a lot of help in this world if you decide to go looking for it. Yharnam and the surrounding areas you explore feel oppressive for sure. They're filled with an atmosphere of menace, packed with gothic horror monstrosities that all want to kill you. But the game isn't unfair, and the scales aren't massively weighted against you. It's a bit more demanding than your average action game, but that's mostly just to make figuring out how to defeat it feel all the more satisfying. And yes, I know how pompous that sounds. Just hear me out, okay? If you explore Central Yharnam thoroughly enough, you'll eventually come across a window with a red lantern in front of it. Any door or window with one of these lanterns outside is somewhere you can interact with an NPC, an inhabitant of Yharnam who's barricaded themselves indoors during the hunt. and given what I've been finding outside, I can hardly blame them. Inside this particular house is a little girl. Her father never came back from the hunt, and her mother left the house to go find him. She asks you to keep a lookout for her mother and gives you a music box to give to her mum if you find her. Apparently it plays one of her father's favourite songs, which helps him remember his children when he forgets them. And how will I know when I found her? A red brooch? Wait, why does that sound familiar? Oh no. This girl's father is actually Father Gascoigne, and the item she gives you, the tiny music box, can actually be used during the boss fight to temporarily stun him and get a few hits in. Finding this music box and using it is actually how I managed to finally defeat Gascoigne during my first run of the game. And now I can give the little girl the great news that I've found her mother.
Miss Hunter, was it really her? Mummy, Mummy, don't leave me alone.
If you think this is bad, just wait until you see what happens next. Bloodborne is filled with stuff like this. A lot of bosses and enemies in general have strategies or weaknesses that you can use to turn situations to your advantage, even if just for a brief window. Exploration can yield items that can help in very specific circumstances, like the tiny music box, or can help you find general consumables that are super useful for upcoming boss fights, like the fire paper you can get from Alfred in Cathedral Ward, or the sedatives you find in the Nightmare of Mensis. A lot of runes you can find also help with specific challenges you're about to face, as well as just being helpful in general. One of the key mechanics Bloodborne uses to help you, however, is insight. Insight is a currency? Yeah, sure, that works. That you gain as you slowly learn more about the nature of Yharnam. You gain it whenever you discover a new area, whenever you see a boss for the first time, or whenever you defeat a boss. You can also gain insight from a consumable item you can find called Madman's Knowledge, which should tell you exactly what kind of insight you're dealing with here. Just to go on a tangent for a moment, but I really love how Bloodborne approaches Lovecraftian themes and tropes surrounding cosmic horror and the concept of madness being a lens into the true nature of the world around you. Like, the more insight you have, the more the world around you can change. Enemies in Cathedral Ward will have more powerful attacks. Entirely new enemies can spawn. You can see the lesser amygdala perched around Cathedral Ward. It's a really great touch, and it's always nice to experience a really excellent piece of fiction that builds upon the concept of Lovecraft, free from the massively racist undertones. Insight does a few really useful things. First and probably most importantly, it wakes up the doll in Hunter's dream and lets you see Gehrman, the old hunter in the wheelchair who runs the workshop, and the messengers, who you can purchase useful items from in exchange for blood echoes or insight. The doll is where you channel your blood echoes, which are basically the game's form of experience, and lets you level your character up and improve their stats. And the workshop is where you can upgrade and repair your weapon, and later, once you found the right tools, slot gems into it to change its properties and do even more damage, as well as equip runes that buff your character, allowing them to carry more blood vials or heal from visceral attacks, that sort of thing. You can't actually do any of this until you find either the Cleric Beast or Father Gascoigne. Those are the only two ways for you to gain your first point of insight, which can admittedly be a little frustrating in the beginning of the game, especially considering the bridge leading to either boss can be an absolute bastard. Insight also lets you summon allies to help you, either in the form of NPCs or other players in Bloodborne's form of co-op. You can even summon Father Gascoigne to help you in Central Yharnam, making the later boss fight a top 10 anime betrayal. Insight is a pretty easy currency to come by in the game. After the first couple of areas, I was awash with insight from finding and defeating bosses, and my inventory was filling up with Madman's Knowledge. It's not terribly difficult to acquire, which means that spending it never feels like a difficult decision. Most areas of the game will have a summon point somewhere that lets you call in an NPC for aid, whether you need a hand defeating a boss that's giving you trouble, or if you just want some backup to help you navigate or clear out a particularly tricky section or level. I brought summoned allies with me to most of the boss fights in Bloodborne, which you've probably already seen in the footage I've been showing you. It's a neat mechanic that gives you a helping hand when you need one. A lot of later bosses don't generally tend to have summoning points nearby, but if you've made it that far into the game, then you probably won't need them because you've gotten good at the game and learned the intricacies of its combat mechanics. But if you still get stuck and need assistance, you can summon other players by ringing the Beckoning Bell, which you receive for the first time you visit the messenger path in the Hunter's Dream, and other players who are ringing the small resonant bell can turn up to help you. Despite being an almost 6-year-old game, there's still a vibrant and very helpful community surrounding Bloodborne, standing by to aid each other or new players that are taking their first steps through Yharnam. This is actually how I managed to beat Gehrman, the second to last boss in Bloodborne. Plot twist. And the only one post Gascoigne that gave me significant bother. After a few failed attempts at the fight, I went online, rang the bell, and had another player show up to tag team the traitorous bastard with me. My temporary court partner died during the fight, but their sacrifice let me beat Gehrman and move on to the last boss and finish the game. I'd like to think that they might one day find this video and know how instrumental their help was in defeating Bloodborne for the first time. You can even set a password when you use the Beckoning Bell, so you can play with a friend if you like. It's not a full-on co-op multiplayer mode, given that your friend will disconnect from the game if either one of you dies, or you kill an area boss, or you teleport, or you go back to the Hunter's Dream. But if you have a friend you want to play a Bloodborne with, you totally can. Bloodborne isn't an unfair game. I mean, well, it is, but only in the same way most other action games are. It'd be a pretty boring epic quest if the odds weren't always against you succeeding. Rather, Bloodborne simply challenges you in very specific ways, and sometimes the first time you run into some of those challenges, you might die. Again, this isn't all that different from most other action games. The other way the game is designed to help you win probably deserves its own chapter.
Good hunter, lost in a nightmare. What did you think of that beastly legend and those ailing wards of the church? I know what you did to them. It's not your fault. The nightmare held them, and now they are free. But what about you?
The way healing works in Bloodborne is quite unique, and a critical part of enabling the game's fast-paced, aggressive gameplay. It all seems fairly standard at first. You take damage from enemies and can heal that damage by using blood vials. Blood vials are quick and easy to use, letting you gain a large portion of your health bar back each time you use one. They don't regenerate at lanterns like Estus flasks do at bonfires in Dark Souls, but it's pretty easy to collect a lot of blood vials very quickly, and any excess ones you find are sent straight to your storage and added to your inventory when you teleport to the Hunter's Dream or respawn after dying. This fairly traditional style of healing is supplemented by a mechanic called rallying. When you take damage, you can quickly attack an opponent back and regain some, or even all of the health you lost. The window is quite small, only a second or two, but it's genius. There's no other word I can think to describe it. Bloodborne is designed fundamentally to be a game that promotes and rewards a more aggressive style of play than From Software's previous games, and what better mechanic could there possibly be than one which allows you to take your health back from an enemy that's just hit you by slicing them up with your sword. In almost any other action game, whether it's a Souls game or not, if you take a bunch of damage, you'll either die or need to back off, create space, and heal, disengaging from combat and going on the defensive. How often you need to do this can be instrumental in determining how any given action game flows. In Bloodborne, there's an extra mechanic that means if you get hit, you can create an opening to keep attacking and be rewarded with getting your health back, which makes combat feel incredible. I mean, you can't always just keep attacking when you get hit, you'll still need to dodge and parry. If you simply try to tank every hit you take from an enemy and strike back to get your health back, you'll get murdered pretty quickly, because either you run out of stamina or because most enemies in the game are no joke if they manage to get a hit on you. Rally simply gives you an additional option, adding an extra, frankly game-changing dimension to how combat works. It's a fairly small thing in the grand scheme of things, but rallying contributes quite significantly to make Bloodborne feel like one of the most satisfying action games I've ever played. What's so genius about the rally mechanic is how it impacts how you think about third-person action games. Since beating Bloodborne twice over Christmas, I've started streaming the PS5 remake of Demon's Souls, and played about an hour of Dark Souls to capture some footage for the earlier chapters of this video. While playing both games, I routinely forgot that rallying wasn't a mechanic in these games. I got hit by an enemy, but saw an immediate opening and went in for an attack with the aim of getting my health back. Now, it might sound like learning to play these games like this has ruined Dark Souls and Demon's Souls for me, but the opposite is actually true. See, something that Bloodborne understands and teaches you better than any other action game in memory is that offense is the best form of defense. Even though I didn't regain any health by swiftly counterattacking an enemy that landed a hit or two on me, immediately hitting them back and maybe even killing them instead of creating an opening to back off and heal was leading me to play these games better. During my first Demon's Souls stream, I barely died, and even managed to take down the game's first two bosses, the Phalanx and the Tower Knight, first time. It honestly didn't even feel too difficult, and a big part of that, I think, is how Bloodborne taught me to play this type of game. Neither Demon's Souls nor Dark Souls has a rally mechanic, but the lessons that Bloodborne instilled in me led to me doing better in those other games, and I was having a better time playing those games as a result. Okay, so I just deleted about 1,000 words going in depth about how and why Bloodborne taught me the fun and more successful way to play Souls games, because when I reread it in the harsh light of day, it's basically just a rehash of one of the concepts in H. Guy's Bloodborne is Genius, and Here's Why video, where he talks about player conditioning, the method by which a game's mechanics can reinforce positive or negative ways of playing a game. And what I'd written was just a slightly worse rehash of what he talked about at length in that video. To summarise, Bloodborne does a way better job at conditioning its players, very subtly teaching them not only how to have fun and succeed in this game, but how to do the same in other Souls games. And as someone who's tried and bounced off of past games in the Souls series, played Bloodborne, and is now having a great time playing Demon Souls, I'd say there's definitely a lot of merit to that hypothesis. I highly recommend checking out his video. It's brilliant, and there's a link in the description, and it goes in a lot of depth on the subject of player conditioning, which is really interesting.
An odd hunter thou art indeed. Very well. Drink deep of our blood. Feel the spreading corruption burn.
Okay, I don't really have a good segue into this chapter. I've spent the past 8,500 words or so going really in depth with my core thesis on why Bloodborne is an amazing game, and has easily become one of my favourite games of all time. When I sit down to write a retrospective video, there's usually some specific point I'm trying to get across. Like how my Resident Evil 3 video was mostly about pointing out that the discussion surrounding the original game didn't match, reality. The Resident Evil 3 Nemesis remake takes a shot at resurrecting the franchise's weakest game. Its weakest game. Its weakest game. And I've accomplished what I set out to do here. I've talked about my history with the Souls games, why I bounced off of them, and why I think Bloodborne is the one that grabbed me and pulled me in. I could just segue this into a conclusion and call this another successful video, but there's a lot about Bloodborne that's truly spectacular that I haven't covered, and I want to take some time to talk about those things too. And since this is my video, I could do whatever I want. Spoiler alert for even more of the game, this is definitely the part of the video that's only for people who have played Bloodborne and already know a bunch of secret shit. One of my favourite things about Bloodborne is simply exploring it, finding literally every possible path and seeing what I can discover by walking them. Sure, the boss fights are amazing and epic, and a lot of discussion about the game is centred around ranking which boss encounters are best, or what weapons are the most powerful, or how much I want Lady Maria to step on me.
She a big girl now. Oh no, she's got even hotter. Oh, fuck my life.
But we've already talked about most of that. And honestly, simply wandering through the world is my favourite part of playing Bloodborne. It's fair to say that the plot of Bloodborne is difficult to follow. You're a hunter who comes to a town where there's a plague outbreak, and everyone has gone bad, and there are monsters everywhere, and you slowly uncover the secrets of the town as you travel further and deeper into blah blah blah. The cutscenes are genuinely really cool and everything, but the best storytelling Bloodborne does isn't really centered around the plot. If you asked me to tell you what I think was going on the entire time, or what I learned about the overarching story of Bloodborne, I really don't have any idea. I mean, this is a game where you unlock the quote-unquote true ending by devouring 3 items called 1/3 umbilical cords, which the game only mentions in one cryptic note hidden in the School of Mensis. And you have to go really far out of your way to actually get these items. And this lets you fight a personification of the moon as the final boss. And then the game ends with you turning into a squid thing and being picked up by the doll you've been using to level up, who doesn't seem fazed about this at all. Okay, that's probably unfair. The truth is, the lore of Bloodborne is actually really fascinating. From Software have created a world of endless intrigue and mystery. It's just that a lot of it is really weird and quite easy to jokingly dismiss, but actually digging into it and figuring out scraps of what's going on around you is genuinely fascinating. But the best part of the story, not the plot, the story, of Bloodborne is your journey as a hunter from a distant land. Bloodborne justifies its obtuseness by casting you as a character who knows as much about the world as you do, which is to say very little. And it's really, really easy to get sucked into exploring every inch of Yharnam and just seeing what you can find. The game does such an incredible job at world building and environmental storytelling that it's impossible to resist trying to find everything you can. Even if sometimes you find something like this. What the fuck is this? Oh my god, that's so unsettling. Ugh! Cainhurst Castle is amazing at this. It's a really difficult place to get to unless you know exactly what you're looking for, or you've just naturally explored literally every nook and cranny. If you explore the Forbidden Woods, you might find an extremely well-hidden path that leads to some caves and to a ridiculously long ladder, which leads you to the back entrance of Vials' clinic. Here, you can find the Cainhurst summons. You can find other things too. But it's the summons you need. Once you've got the summons, you head to Hemwick Charnel Lane, kill the witches there if you haven't already, and then approach this conspicuous obelisk, where you'll be picked up and whisked away by a horse-drawn carriage. When you arrive at Cainhurst, you might turn around and notice that the horses that brought you here are dead, and the bridge leading towards Yharnam is destroyed, which might leave you with a few questions, but it's usually best not to dwell on this. Cainhurst Castle is one of my favourite levels in a video game in a long time. It's set in the grip of winter with snow and frost covering the ground, which gives it a very different aesthetic and feeling to the rest of Bloodborne. When you enter the castle itself, you'll hear crying and see fearful servants desperately cleaning, and wait, is that a ghost? The story of Cainhurst Castle and the Vile Bloods is gripping. Exploring what I'm sure was once a proud and vibrant estate, now a haunted shell of its former self, is genuinely engaging. This is also where you'll find a ton of the coolest looking claws and armour, including the dress and crown combo that you'll have seen me rocking in a lot of this video, and it leads to one of the game's best optional boss fights, Mortal Ligarius, and one of the most interesting NPC encounters, providing you put on the crown. Ligarius drops after the boss fight and stand in front of this specific wall, and did I mention Bloodborne could be a bit obtuse? I was in awe as I explored Cainhurst Castle. It isn't the only place that invoked a sense of wonder in me as I explored, but it is, in my opinion, the best. Well, if you want to really have your mind blown, find the door about halfway down this hall. There are many, many other things I could talk about here. How great the weapon variety is, the game's truly incredible sound design and music. But this video is probably getting long enough at this point. I could probably talk non-stop about how brilliant Bloodborne is for hours, and hey, if you want to have that conversation, hit me up in the comments or on Twitter. My username's in the description.
Oh, a hunter, are you? And an outsider? What a mess you've been caught up in. And tonight of all nights.
I've played a lot of Bloodborne over the past month. I've spent over a week writing the script for this video, and I've literally just spent quite a long time talking about how amazing a game it is. Having done and said all that, it's not quite a perfect game, and there are a couple of things I want to get off my chest about Bloodborne. Some annoyances that I've kept to myself, because none of my gaming friends have really played much Bloodborne, and they're all sick of hearing me talk about it at this point. First, Blood Vials. They're a really cool healing mechanic, you can carry a ton of them, and because they heal a percentage of your total hit points, they're always useful. However, because they're technically a finite resource, there are going to be moments when you start to run low or run out of them altogether. Usually if you get stuck on a specific area or a boss fight, or even if you just used a ton of them taking down a particular boss, your supply of blood vials will start to dwindle. And if you're getting killed, you're not really replenishing your supply. So there will be more than a few times while playing the game where you'll need to drop whatever you're doing and go and farm some more. This can be really annoying. It's not as painful as it sounds. Whether by accident or by design, the best place to quickly farm blood vials just happens to be the starting area of the game. You know, the one that kicked your ass for the first few hours you played? While farming for healing items is less than ideal, there can be some catharsis in returning to the area that gave you so much trouble and absolutely wrecking everything in sight. And also the camera can be a bit shite. I noticed this while I was capturing my Dark Souls footage too, so I don't think this is an issue that's limited to just Bloodborne. For the most part, this will never really be an issue, but there are times where the camera can make it really difficult to tell what the fuck is even happening. Like, look at this footage from me fighting Dark Beast Paul. If you can figure out what's going on here, that's great. Because I can vividly remember having no idea. I think towards the end of this fight, I was just pushing buttons and praying that I wasn't about to get squished. Thank the great ones I bought an NPC allied to tank some of the attacks. Encounters with other hunters aren't great. You remember how I debunked the idea that Bloodborne is a game filled with nothing but frustrating encounters designed to murder you for the sheer fun of it? Well, fighting NPC hunters that aren't bosses is actually the closest the game gets to feeling like exactly that. NPC hunters have similar movesets to you. They use the same weapons, dodge a lot, have guns with seemingly infinite ammo, and they could have been really interesting. Battling enemies with similar fighting styles and abilities to you could have made for some really unique encounters. Except that they have gigantic health pools for some reason. They take ages to kill, and they can kill you in a few hits. They're not fun. They're a chore. And whoever decided to put 3 of them together in this one church in Yharnam is an evil, evil person. Do yourself a favour if you decide to play the game after watching this video and just run past them. Trust me, they're not worth it. I also didn't spend any time talking about the challenge dungeons in this video. They're a great idea, in principle. Randomised dungeons you can dive into, essentially creating a version of Bloodborne that's a roguelike with endless content. The thing is, they're not really all that great. There aren't really that many different enemies or room types, and everything starts repeating really quickly. Aside from a couple of really cool boss fights that I wish had made their way into the main game, and one incredibly memorable encounter I had with a pilgrim, they're entirely forgettable. And the only thing I'm not looking forward to having to face if I decide to go back for the platinum is the chalice dungeons. Lastly, and this is the most important point I can make in this chapter, snow lanterns? Can get fucked.
Surely I need not repeat myself. Go, I say. You have the whole night to dream. Make the best of it.
Bloodborne is an amazing game. There, I just summed up like a 12,000 word video in 5 words. Not only is this one of my favourite games of all time, a game I enjoyed so much the first thing I did after beating it was to start New Game Plus and immediately beat it again, it's also the game that taught me the best way to approach other Souls games and games that are like Dark Souls. Playing Bloodborne and taking the time to let this lesson sink in and for the game to get under my skin flipped some kind of switch in my brain. It honestly makes me wonder how many other games I've written off because I was playing them wrong. Is that a thing game critics are allowed to say? You can play a game wrong? Oh, it's too late now, I've already said it. If you've ever been put off by the extreme marketing and discourse surrounding Bloodborne or the Souls games in general, that they're uber hard games that are just like the One Ring and take genuine pleasure in killing you and making sure you have a bad time, trust me, it's not that bad. The first time I played Bloodborne, I bounced right out. I played with a closed mind because of everything I thought I knew about the Souls games, and the fairly steep learning curve at the beginning of the game confirmed that this was a game that was just too hard for me. But sitting down to play with an open mind and giving the game a chance made me realise that once you take the time to learn its nuances, Bloodborne isn't much more difficult than other action games. Look, I'm genuinely really bad at video games. This has been catalogued and proven time and time again on YouTube and Twitch, and I have many witnesses who can attest to my general shiteness at games. If I can do it, I truly believe that you can too. I was originally going to make this conclusion way longer and more in depth, but then I realised that I was just rewriting the entire video into a more condensed form and decided that probably wasn't a good idea or a good use of your time or mine. I feel like I've already proven the many points I wanted to make. The key ones being that Bloodborne isn't as hard as you've heard, and it's a really amazing game. So I'm going to let game critics prove the point for me. Okay, so I have the Bloodborne Metacritic open, and we're going to do the same thing that we did for the Dark Souls reviews before, and we're going to scroll through the summaries and we're going to see what the critical consensus is. It's got a 92 based on 100 critic reviews. I mean, it's high. I'd put it higher, but that's probably just because, you know, it's one of my favourite games of all time. Okay, so let's have like a dazzling work of dank, abject horror that cements Miyazaki as one of the all-time greats. There'll be times when you feel genuinely lost, frustrated and unsure of your next step, but you will carry on. You will beat it, and when you do, there's no other game that can make you feel more elated about doing so. Its elegance, precision, humour and challenge make Bloodborne irresistible. Ultimately, the horror is secondary. Wonder is the true transfusion on offer here. Clever, transfusion, because, you know, Bloodborne. Blood transfusion. PS4 gets a must-have with Bloodborne. However, there isn't another game as astonishing in its artistic work, as well as making us feel things like fear, being powerful, getting frustrated, aware of dangers, and finally achieving the ultimate satisfaction. Bloodborne means all that and much more. I stared at Bloodborne, scared and unsure, quaking in my boots every time a new enemy showed its ugly face. I was horrified, timid, and alone. But now I have a confidence and strong sense of self. I am a hunter in Yharnam. I'm confident in my abilities. I know my weaknesses, and I trust my instincts. From start to finish, Bloodborne revels in its unique, if somewhat masochistic, approach to entertainment. There are very few games that cause you to curse the developer one minute and sing their praises the next, but this is one of them. It is quite simply a sensationally designed and superbly refined offering. Challenging, intriguing, and extremely dark, Bloodborne is an experience that nobody should miss out on. A masterpiece. Damn right, it's a masterpiece. So, like, yeah, those are the Bloodborne reviews, or a few of them. Like, again, I'm not going to read every single one. But, like, you can see the shift in like, the way, like, all of these review summaries talk about Bloodborne, and compared to the way they talked about Dark Souls, which we covered earlier in the video, which is that, like, the discussion of difficulty in Dark Souls was the thing. It was the thing in all of the reviews. You're not going to have fun. It's like climbing Everest. It's like the One Ring. You know, you're going to hate this. It's masochistic. The game's going to dominate you. And here, like, apart from a lot of stuff about loading screens and lengths and bugs, which I actually remember from the launch of the game, like, there's discussion of the challenge here, but these review summaries either just mention it as part of, like, the whole package in talking about how great the game is, or they segue from that challenge into talking about how great the game is, either despite the challenge or because of the challenge, or, like, talking about being able to overcome the challenge. Like, the Dark Souls review summaries that we looked at, like, were off-putting, like, on purpose. Like, it's like climbing Everest, for example. It's not something you play for fun. It's something you play, say you've played it. Whereas in Bloodborne, it's just, these review summaries are more encouraging. Like, some of them are literally encouraging you to play the game, saying, like, you should definitely stick with this. This is amazing. This is fantastic. This is a masterpiece. And, like, that's just the Bloodborne effect. Bloodborne teaches you not just how to play Bloodborne, but kind of how to play Souls games. And it's amazing. So, you know, go play it. It's amazing. That's my conclusion. I'm done. I'm going to look at some more fan art now. So now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to Twitter to endlessly tweet about wanting a Bloodborne 2. So if you've watched all the way through the video and gotten to this part, thank you. Like, genuinely, sincerely thank you. Like, I put a lot of work into this one. And my focus in 2021 in making videos is going to be on making videos like this, where I go really in depth on specific games or game theories. So, like, in 2020, I made 3 of these, and I really, like, enjoyed making them. Like, they were probably the videos I really enjoyed making the most, and I've spent over a month making this Bloodborne video, and I've loved every minute of it. So, like, apart from the 2 podcasts that we do a week, where we talk about games and also talk about the things surrounding games, like, this type of video is going to be, like, the main focus of what I do in 2021 as far as YouTube videos go. So look forward to more of those videos. I don't know what game I'm gonna choose next to play. I kind of want to make these videos sort of like, just look at a game and go, that's the game I really want to play, or that's a game I really have something to say about, and then just sit down and do it. So there's no forward planning. My aim is to try and get one of these videos out every month, but I don't know how likely that is. The next one I want to make is of a shorter game rather than a huge 30+ hour experience that I played twice over, which means it'll probably be a shorter video. I haven't finished editing this yet, so I don't even know how long it was, but the script was twice as long as my Mass Effect Andromeda video, which was half an hour, so it's gonna be a long video. But yeah, this is really the end of the video now. I just wanted to say all of that and say, you know, thanks for watching the video. I love you for that. And now I'm gonna stop recording and the video's gonna end. So bye.